Welcome to Poets and Thinkers, the podcast where we explore the future of humanistic business leadership. I'm your host, Ben, and today I'm speaking with Sean Wolcott. We had to take a little break over the last few weeks. I was out sick and couldn't really get in front of a microphone. That said, we have an amazing set of episodes coming over the next few weeks and months, leading us into the summer when we'll take an actual break to rest and get ready to prepare the lineup for season 3. Now back to Sean. Sean and I met over a decade ago at Microsoft, and he's since been one of my favorite people I've ever worked with. In this episode, you'll find out why. Since that time, Sean has changed the focus of his creative work and is now a full-time composer and musician who also owns and runs a unique analog recording studio in Washington State. He's published 10 albums in the last 3 years and composed bold, emotional scores for film and television. When we recorded our interview, he had just returned from Japan to showcase his music. This conversation, just like prior episodes with other artists, is a reminder of why artists must be part of the current societal and technological conversations about AI. We get into what Sean calls the Hall of Mirrors, a tech landscape obsessed with valuation bubbles and AI products being crammed into every corner of creative life. He's blunt about what he sees: Spotify promoting artificial artists, AI tools that amount to what he described as a pink meat paste of sonic okayness, and a race to the bottom that insults the people who've been spending their lives developing craft. However, at its core, this is not a pessimistic conversation. It reminds us that lived human experience is what makes art meaningful, why the frictionful process of making art can't be separated from the art itself, and what it means to trust your own path in a world that keeps trying to streamline and automate it away. All right, let's get into the episode. And if you like the show, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this podcast. Sean, where does this podcast find you?
Hi, Ben. Great to see you and hear you. I am in my studio in Everett, Washington, which is just about 20 miles or so north of Seattle.
Fantastic. And for those who don't know you, give us a little bit of an idea of who you are, what you do these days specifically, and what drives you.
Yeah, I mean, I am just an artist who tries to pay the bills doing so. And so that's kind of been my whole life, is sort of how can I pay the bills doing things that I care about. And really my whole life that's revolved around music being one thing, art being another thing, which has evolved into graphic design and movies.
You are wildly underselling yourself, so I'm going to help a little bit with setting the stage for everyone who really is not familiar with your work. When you and I first met, it was actually over 10 years ago. I did a little bit of kind of going back to the calendar at Microsoft, and you were a principal designer, I believe, really instrumental to a lot of the kind of key initiatives that at the time shaped Microsoft design and the relationship people had with the product. Including the design language at the time, which was really industry defining, which, I think only in retrospect people really started to realize. So almost ahead of its time. But you've also learned from and worked with Massimo Vignelli, who, for those who are not familiar with the design history, has been one of the legends. And maybe you can even give folks a little bit of an idea of that as well. So, but then more and more, as I've been following, your work the last years, you've also been doing a lot more music, and more of your time you're spending on music, which is why I wanted to have this conversation with you, especially at this point in time. So maybe talk a little bit about your journey and some of the kind of key inflection points for you and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's great. It's hard to believe it was about 10 years ago when we first met, but really all my life, I've been drawn from out of the gate just to kind of the intersection of media, mainly, music and like visuals, be that, seeing animation and things like that starting up. But anyways, Drew all growing up, and in high school sort of stumbled upon graphic design. And was doing that for music, actually. I was making artwork for cassette tapes of my own music.
Nice.
And I had a teacher who showed, sort of told me that was graphic design. And, for me, sort of instead of the restaurant job you do in high school, it was me getting a job at a place called Alpha Graphics and another place called Kinko's, where I would just do, resumes and, dumb little things for people, but sort of discovered this aspect of graphic design. Even in terms of art, I was always kind of curious about the intersection of technology and the way that art can be used with technology. So that continues today. With my music, I do a lot of things that are extremely kind of humanistic,
Mm-hmm.
but still I remain kind of curious about how, technology can use art today, which might, surprise people that sort of come to me from the side of music. But in terms of graphic design and my journey there, got some jobs, pretty quick in my early 20s working at some design agencies in Seattle. And all this time, I'd been playing music for just as long. I started playing guitar when I was 14 after hearing Nirvana here in Seattle,
Mm-hmm.
and was fortunate to see them a few times, and a lot of other special music that happened here. Yeah, sort of visual arts and music have always been connected. But in terms of graphic design, I found that kind of leading me along as a career path. Got some jobs in the 90s in Seattle for design agencies. Inevitably, Microsoft was always one of those
Mm-hmm.
clients, if you liked it or not.
Yeah.
And along that way, ended up doing just funny little things like working on the gradient design for the XP logo and things that kind of go out in the world in ways you sort of can't comprehend. But anyways, corporate design was a way to pay the bills. And along the way, I had discovered the work of Massimo Vignelli, who you had mentioned, who was a really kind of revolutionary graphic designer that came up in the 50s, 60s through the 70s, was born and started doing design in Milan. He ended up immigrating to the United States, did design in Chicago and eventually New York City, but was really kind of one of the key people of kind of taking corporate design to what it is today. And a lot of this came out of things like, the Bauhaus,
Mm-hmm.
and really kind of a post-war European way of thinking about design as a visual practice, as an aesthetic practice, but in addition to that, as a way to meaningfully solve problems. Um,
Yeah. And for one of for those who are not too familiar with design history, everyone has seen Massimo's work and what it has influenced, right? The New York City subway map and system, being one of the pieces of work he was responsible for, and that has shaped
Absolutely.
a lot of, not just, and I think that's the interesting part, which we can get into in a little bit later, not just the way people, New Yorkers and tourists navigate the city, but it's become part of the culture, right? Like there's so many of the elements that are now being used from everywhere, from album covers to merch for the last decades, and it's become synonymous with not just the city, but the culture of the city, and so on and so forth. And just to kind of add a little bit of color to what you're describing and how influential he and the work was.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to the nature of graphic design, where just the way it can be, amplified through cities or corporations or, like that, where it sort of becomes ubiquitous in a way that is not, it's more passive in a way that it's not like, a music artist, it's like there's been a joke about being a famous graphic designer is like being a famous plumber. But to your point though, yeah, just his influence definitely, can't be understated. And he came from a line of a lot of other just really influential designers, and a lot of these designers, when I was discovering their works, they were in their 70s, 80s. And in the case of Armin Hoffman, who was a Swiss designer, I got to speak with him a few times, and he was in his hundreds at the time.
Wow. Yep.
The recurring thing from a lot of these designers I took away was just their passion, that, be it if they're 70, 80, 90, or 100, how mentally engaged they were with just not only the work they did and not living in the past, but very much engaged with the present and thinking about how design affects things today, even if they're not actively practicing.
Yeah. I have a number of questions regarding that. But before we go in there, I want to talk a little bit about the music that you are increasingly spending more time with. So tell us a little bit about your music practice and what that looks like.
Yeah, so that's really something that's always kind of equally been a passion point for me, is writing music and composing. I've done it, played in bands and things like that just really for 35 years now. But about, I guess, 9 years ago when I was, self-employed, at that point, when you're self-employed, anything you do that people will pay you for is work. And so why not try to make it the things that you want to be doing the
Yeah.
most? So I felt like after, a number of years, I'd sort of achieved a lot of things I wanted to with just design from a career standpoint. And it's something I still do and will, never stop doing. But with music, felt like there was things I wanted to do in terms of, posing and, creating a body of work. So really that kind of was something that I sort of evolved over the years, but really toward post-COVID, I ended up finding a space for a recording studio here in Everett, Washington that kind of allowed me to take the next step, both professionally and in terms of space, unlocking what I was able to do. Because essentially I've always been inspired by a lot of recordings from the 1960s and 1970s, and really spent years kind of studying the approach of making albums in that humanistic way that was not necessarily anti-computer, but it is pro humans using their tangible material skills in a way that steps away from the computer. So for that, I built a recording studio, which is essentially the sort of 60s, 1970s style space that doesn't exist anymore. And so once I had that space, that kind of unlocked some new things of a way I was able to create, and was kind of a convergence of where I was personally in terms of wanting to create things in that way. And in terms of design, I mean, all you really need is a pencil, a computer, and a desk, and that's where I'm sitting now. But the space beyond me is about close to 2,000 square feet of recording space. So that's like a control room. I've got a pretty large live room, just where sound can develop, and I can get large groups of musicians together to make real things happen with real people, and that's kind of a thing that sort of brings me joy, and hopefully others more and more in this sort of hall of mirrors world that we're increasingly living in.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I want to explore with you, and we will try and put a link in the show notes to some photos of the space, because from what I've seen, it's also just aesthetically absolutely beautiful, and it has that it evokes this feeling, this emotion that you would get when you listen to a lot of the music from that time period, which in itself is also a fascinating maybe observation. So that's great. And you also, I mean, you're publishing the music. I also saw you were just, I think, in Asia with
I was just
your
in
music.
Japan.
Yeah, very nice. So maybe to kind of dive a little deeper into both the design side and the music, and that's probably where it all connects. A few months ago, you and I were chatting back and forth a little bit over text, because you posted something online, a quote that very much resonated with me and I thought would be a great topic for us to explore. And I'm just going to read the quote so I don't misremember it. The quote was, "Today, as artificial intelligence seeks to mimic and monetize creativity, we stand at a crossroads. AI-generated art and music synthesized from existing human works lack the visceral essence that comes from lived experience. They are but hollow echoes, devoid of the struggles, triumphs, and soul that define true artistry." Without any other prompt, talk to me about this.
Yeah, so I believe that was written by Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, who, kind of always has been a big inspiration in terms of artistry and music. But yeah, that's something where I've been thinking about a lot, this notion of knowledge versus experience. That, obviously with artificial intelligence, it's depressing and boring to talk about. I think mostly boring in a lot of ways. But I think it's an important thing to talk about. I think boring in the sense where it's just trying to be crammed down everybody's throats right now in ways that we don't even necessarily need it, just because the tech market has, back to the Hall of Mirrors point that I made, has been so obsessed with this valuation increase of, a bubble on top of a bubble. I've been around long enough where I saw the .com bubble, doing graphic design, but there's definitely obviously some great, ways theoretically that artificial intelligence can be used to help humanity, but the people that control these things are increasingly more and more limited. The energy it takes and things like that is increasingly insidious
Yeah.
upon but just in terms of kind of back to the notion of design and just the ethos of wanting to do things that make me happy, bring some joy to the world, that it's not about money. So I think a lot of just the world has just been obsessed with this notion of shareholder supremacy, and money creates. Obviously, we know money doesn't create happiness, but in terms of the that quote, I think there's a key difference that I've noticed. Whereas with these artificial intelligence systems, that they have knowledge, and knowledge is an important factor, and obviously things can be done with knowledge that is useful with these systems. But the notion of experience, actually lived experience as a human, is something that those systems, they'll get better and better at emulating, but they really can never replicate. And even if they get 99.9% good at it, it sort of defeats the purpose, because experience as a human is something that goes beyond knowledge.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot, where just in terms of music, in the last 3 years, I made 10 albums. And sort of I look back at that and think, like, how did that happen?
Yeah, I saw that when I was doing some more research and I looked at the entire body of work. It's like, wow, I did not take count, obviously, but that was a massive amount of work that you put out.
Yeah, I mean, I know how it happened because I did it, but I think there's an aspect of experience that is backed up with knowledge, where, for instance, I make an album and I learn a lot of things, but a lot of things that I learn, they're not binary. They're not things I can express in words. They're more emotional or intuitive. So in terms of art, I think, the notion that artificial intelligence, they're just trying to slap it on everything they can. The fact, Spotify, for instance, is trying to put systems in play where they're doing something that's, quote, in quotes, artist forward, where essentially a user can just make their own songs. You see this in the film industry, where people can, make their own Star Wars movie or whatever, and it's licensed by Disney. And to me, that sounds just like incredibly depressing and boring. And I think at the end of the day, it's actually just a complete insult to people who have spent their lives crafting these skills. And we do them not because we want, acclaim or money, all those things. I mean, money is good for paying the bills, but we do it because we care about it. We do it because we're passionate about it. And so essentially that knowledge that these systems have will never be the same as experience. And I think as humans, we're able to create things. Obviously, everything we do is, or I do, or anyone does, is based on, our experience and things we've heard and seen, and we're repurposing those in the same way that one might argue that an algorithm is. But I think the aspect of again, experience versus knowledge in ways that we can't even articulate, because with these music albums that I've done, one of the things that kind of helped me to unlock this was this notion of narrative, where I started making albums partially as a way of getting into film composing, but this idea of making an album that had a concept, and I was thinking about a narrative, that actually made creating a lot faster and easier for me. But in terms of the notion of experience, the more I made them, the more sort of I noticed things would just happen kind of almost on accident, in a way that is in a non-binary sense from just the experiential act of doing something. And again, for a marketplace that's trying to sell artificial intelligence products, this is all just as boring to them as their stuff is to me. But the point being is, I think there's going to be increasingly a niche space for people that value things that are made by humans in a tangible way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually wrote something, I think it was now 2 or 3 years ago, when the initial kind of big kind of generative AI wave started to build, called Authentically Human. I expressed the same thought there, that I think that as human beings, we are craving the authenticity and the connection of real human experiences. And so I fully agree with you there. One question or one thought that just popped up as I was listening to you is even or the understanding of what art even is in the first place, right? When you look at a lot of the ways these tools image generation, video generation, even the music generative AI music generation tools are positioned is that, they can make a song within a few seconds and that's it. And it's really more targeted to what the consumer, right? The point of art is first and foremost that it's an expression of the artist. If you find, and I think Rick Rubin said something along those lines too, where as soon as it's made, you're successful as an artist.
Exactly.
But it's interesting how that very technocratic understanding and obviously the narratives around that have come from these tech companies is completely distorting that understanding even of what art is.
Yeah, definitely. I think also too, as an artist, I think it's, one of the sort of byproducts or jobs, that we do along the way is just, hopefully elevate or expand somebody's understanding of things, just as I feel like art and design for that matter has done to me. And I think with these, things and systems, it's really kind of about sort of de-educating people in a way that the more people can all think the same, the more we can just all sell them the same stuff.
Yes.
And it's really sort of like a race to the bottom, the same thing where it's like, well, why would I hire a composer when I can just, push 3 prompts? Or why would I hire a designer to do a logo for several $1,000s when I can, I used to have to pay $5 on Fiverr.com or whatever that was.
Yeah.
Now it's, now I can pay 5 cents with the prompt. So I think, for me as, business owner, those aren't the people I'm chasing. Those have never been the people I'm chasing. And I think sort of the good news here is that even, as the sort of, tech hellscape, sort of amps up its hellishness, that there's always going to be a niche spot for artists, whatever type they are, to thrive. For people that value that. But there's an aspect, for me with the music or design I do, music being something that's, more and more taking over kind of day-to-day things. And there's a liberation aspect of that too, where it's like, I don't need to look for a client. I make a thing to then sell. And then the more I do that, the more sort of word spreads. And by distributing them myself, and doing a, really kind of a DIY approach, top to bottom, where I've got the studio, I've got the label. That way, when somebody buys an album of mine, that's just income that just comes fully back in to make more things. And then also for creating a library of music that can be licensed for, people to use for sampling or to place in a film and television. So there's kind of been a secondary aspect of being able to make a passive income stream by having a library of music. And the bigger your library is, the more kind of potential it has.
Right.
But for me, it's not ever been about just kind of crapping out a bunch of things, but kind of keeping the quality really high. But I've found that through the decades of experience that I have, that I was able to kind of move pretty quickly of doing things I thought were of high quality and keeping me artistically engaged and trying to always do new things, relatively fast.
Yeah. One thing that's really interesting in this discussion is there is a definitely different school of thought when it comes to the artificially generated art. That can be images, can be sound. And that being that, well, this is going to get so good very quickly that we can no longer differentiate between machine made and human made. And when I'm thinking through even physiologically, neuroaesthetically, there may be some truth to that, right? Because on the one hand, we only, as human beings, as animals, respond to the light waves and the sound waves that hit us.
Yep.
Right, and hit our bodies. But then I hear you talk about, obviously, and you're not, the first or the only one, obviously, to say that, but I think the way you express it is really interesting because you talk a lot about intuitiveness. You talk a lot about, there's the process itself that's unfolding as you're making the music or as you're designing. And then there's the story or the thing that you want to express personally. Which one is true? Is none of them true? Are they somewhat true? How do we determine if they're true? Those are questions that I ask myself, but I would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting. I've thought about this recently where with, more of these like video tools coming into play, audio tools, that more and more people don't know what's actually real on the screens that are in front of them.
Yeah.
And I know for me personally, that makes me just feel less engaged. And obviously, engagement is like the key factor of these platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if there will be kind of an increasing cannibalization effect on these systems on themselves, where if you look in there and you don't know anything that's real, be it sight or sound, in a certain level, like from a human sense, like what's the point? And then people
Yeah.
just abandon these platforms. I mean, that'd be amazing. I don't know that will happen.
That is definitely the hopeful version of it.
Yeah, yeah. And but I think in that sense, yeah, we as users have the power to not shop somewhere, to not use a certain system, and any sort of notion to think that we have to do that to thrive or to be successful as an artist is just bullshit that the bullshit salesman is selling to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in terms of like what is real and what is not, and can we have an emotional reaction to something that's not real, the answer is yes. I mean, I think there's been things I've seen that it's like, wow, that's beautiful and that's fascinating. There was this is really obscure, but there was like some video going around that it was like a Japanese East television performance of like Wonderwall by Oasis, which the song didn't come out till the 90s. I mean, I knew it was fake, but it was such like a low res kind of thing that it looked and kind of sounded real.
Yeah.
And I know the cues better than most people to know what
Right.
makes
What
it
to look
real or
for.
not.
Yeah.
But that's kind of beside the point. But meanwhile, it was awesome. It sounded really good. But
So in that case,
but
though,
it's
how do
fake.
you judge that? Yeah, but how do you judge that then? If you say on the one hand, it's actually really good, it's entertaining and this and that, is that like how? Well,
It's empty. It's just empty. And not only it's an insult to everyone it stole from.
yeah, and I with you on the ethical moral side, and I think on the empty side, one of the things that I've been often using as kind of an analogy is like it's like a microwave meal, or it's like a McDonald's burger. It's that kind of maybe level of intellectual and artistic and emotional nutrition.
Yeah,
Um,
it's the bottom of the barrel for
yeah.
sure.
Yet at the same time, determining that and discerning that requires quite a high level of, I guess, education and maybe even kind of being connected to your own being or your, ability to emotionally respond to this. Because it's not that
Yeah.
we're born creative, we're also sort of born artistic, but in terms of really judging quality of art or even responding to art in any sort of way requires quite a bit of education.
Yeah, it really does. And a lot of these kind of usage of social media platforms have sort of proven to sort of de-educate and
Yeah.
radicalize in more ways than one. So I think, yeah, it's kind of a mentality that's the exception to the rule
Yeah.
for sure. And a lot of people don't care. It's like it's a funny video. I hit the like button. I went on to the next one. And people have asked me, I mean, like maybe like 2 or 3 times, like, oh, I wonder if is music is AI, which that actually it actually made me angry. I mean, I know that's not what I'm not mad at the person that ever asked or wondered that, but it like for somebody who's spent an hour plus every day for the last 35 years,
Yeah.
that's why it sounds like it is, because of curiosity and just endless toil that you don't see. The reason of that toil is because you love to do it, and in those moments, so I think this is another aspect of this point, is that the thing you don't see in a creation is really kind of what the creator felt, what they learned about themselves, both tangible and intangibly. So, I mean, I do music for my own I make a living off of it, of music. Same with design, but I do it for my own mental, emotional well-being
Yeah.
in ways that I don't even understand. So it's that aspect of, and all the musicians I work with on my albums, like we play music because we love it, and it just like helps us in ways that is not this static kind of understanding as these systems provide.
Yeah. There's a couple questions that I have around specifically this point. Maybe starting with, I know that, and you already touched on it a little bit at the beginning, in your studio, you use a lot of equipment that's really quite old, analog. As you mentioned earlier, you're really interested in the handmade process. On the one hand, on the other hand, it is electronically mediated, obviously, especially in that time. That was a big part of the change that occurred. So there's that, and that brings a certain quality into the music itself. And there's a reason you do it. And I would love to hear about that. And then connected to that is the question that I asked myself in that article I mentioned that I wrote about authentically human, that not only do I believe the need for in-person human experiences will increase for those that can afford them in the future, but also I wonder, is it going to be more important, thinking about what you just described about people asking, is this AI? Actually, the process of the making is being documented, and that becomes more the product than the actual art itself.
I mean, I could see that sort of becoming a thing, but for me, like if I'm documenting what I'm doing, I'm sort of out of the headspace of making it.
Mm,
And even if someone was there filming or whatever, that it would be incredibly boring. Where I'm just like staring at the wall, thinking about how to do a 2 second line for 3 hours. But
yeah,
I mean, having to sort of like prove yourself, is sort of just like it's just kind of a weird thing. But it is a thing.
yeah,
But I think, I mean, the fact that I could, show up tomorrow and play a show somewhere with everyone that I played the record with, that's one way I think artists can continue to prove it, where you've
yeah,
got more and more on a lot of these systems. Spotify tends to be sort of the bottom of the barrel in that sense, where they are promoting artificial artists, artificial music.
hmm,
And yeah, people just they don't even know. And maybe they don't even care. But I think back to the ethics notion, the fact that all these things were just taken non-consensually from
yes,
millions of years of human experience and sort of put out through the meat grinder into this pink meat paste of sonic okayness
yeah.
it might be great or it might be surprising, but I think it's just how it was done it doesn't support artists in the real world.
Yeah,
That's just the
it's
borderline thing.
yeah, it's one of my biggest criticisms that I also expressed publicly of, for example, Johnny Ive selling his company to OpenAI, as someone who
Hmm.
has always been running around in the few interviews he gave, expressing and defending creativity and the power of an idea, and then literally going to sell his company to for the right price tag to the company that did not at all respect any of the creative content that humans have produced. And in fact, we just hit the threshold, I think, of there's more artificially generated content now on the internet than human created content. So there's like, that inflection point is already there. And I love your point about, for the music part, you can show up and play a show. And I think that's something that probably people will crave more than ever going forward. Also, made me think of I don't know if you're familiar with the illustrator and artist Oliver Jeffers with his children's books, but he also has a fine art practice. And one of the things that he started doing, I think years ago, were these dipped portrait paintings. Basically, he spends months, I think they're oil paintings, painting portraits of people, only to then have in a physical location. It's an event and people get invited to then dip the painting almost 2/3 into one color, pot of paint, and then pulls it out. And most of the painting is then covered in this one color. And I think there's a lot of aspects there that I think speak to more of what we'll probably need and crave in the future, is that real life experience, that not reproducible, as you said earlier, right? Like you want to be in that moment, but documenting that moment is not the important part. It's actually the being in that space, being in that moment.
Yeah, and I absolutely, and I think I still believe it, and I think no matter how much time, I think humans have potential to create things that these systems could never think of, and trillions upon trillions of computations, and our motivation is just fundamentally different, and just yeah, again, sort of like having to differentiate is just kind of this odd thing when they're so close to each other, but just disconnect, go out in the real world,
Yes.
connect with real people, share real experiences, and we'll all be happier and healthier as a result. I know, for me, it definitely helps me a lot.
Yeah, I agree. It's the same for me. Actually, the intentional disconnect and seeking real experiences, and be it just a walk and getting some fresh air, I think is increasingly becoming more and more important. But even that takes a lot of discipline, because a lot of these tools and a lot of these artifacts really hijack our biology in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, right? I was going to ask you, because as someone who has been now a creative and a creative professional, and also a mentor, guide to others, given what we just talked about and what you're experiencing, what's some advice that you would give, especially young people, And maybe that's also, good for leaders in general in the business context. But what advice would you give young people in terms of just getting themselves ready for the future that we're already in the nascent stage of a lot of this kind of coming over us in a wave, and we'll see what persists. But what would you advise people? What skills to build? What habits to form? What to invest in? And really just kind of getting ready.
Yeah. So in that sense, I would say to just trust themselves. Don't believe what the market tells you that you can or can't do. I mean, for me, I spent my entire career doing things people said I couldn't do in a roundabout way. One of the design agencies I was working in, I was doing kind of more print production work. And they're like, said, okay, this is where the designers, sit on this side. And then the real designers are over there. And like we don't usually, transfer people over. There was something to that aspect. Maybe this is why like seeing the movie at Gattaca at 18 resonated with me for
Uh-huh.
so much.
Great movie.
Yeah. So I think just follow your own path, take a heavy grain of salt with what, the quote unquote elders tell you. There's, wisdom to be gained from that, but I think trusting yourself and knowing that you have the potential to carving your own path, even if people tell you it's a dead art or whatever you want to do. Again, it's not the easy route, but it's the most fulfilling way to live your life and the most authentic way.
It's a really great kind of almost summary of, I think, one of the kind of key themes so far that has emerged. And I just had another interview for the podcast with Tim, who's the founder of the House of Beautiful Business. And at the end, his advice was really to love and to create, to summarize it and paraphrase him there. And that's something that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, in with regard to the future of humanistic business leadership is, over the last 100 years, now kind of coming back to the very beginning of, what we briefly talked about, the Bauhaus and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and all of that. But the last 100 years, we've basically built an education system. We've rewarded people for basically reproducing predictable results. And the more I'm learning, the more I'm digging into this, the more I think we need to really elevate the skills that I guess grow human ingenuity and the ability for us to remain creative the way we were born and just finding our own path. And I think the artistic path is exactly that, right? Is the being in tune with yourself and your surroundings. And even if that being in tune means there's a tension there, being able to express that in a way that, hopefully it makes other people respond and react. And that's how we interact as society, because we've been making art since the beginning of humanity.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's again, there's so much more to existence other than the engine of technology and commerce. And
Yeah.
yeah, at the end of the day, that's not really what's important. And just to make a piece of art, sort of can be therapeutic for ourselves, and then you get a message from somebody on the other side of the world and they talk about how it's impacted them or help them to kind of deal with something they were going through, or just have a moment of respite in a world that feels chaotic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of things that I'm happy to put out in the world, and definitely want to try to continue to as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of this. I think it's a quote, and it's become an internet meme. But I need to paraphrase it. Basically, we discount the arts pretty much all our lives, and then we read poems and eulogies when people die, right? And listen
Yeah.
to music when people die. And so I think it's a really interesting tension. Which you made a point earlier about the way these AI companies, specifically, but tech companies maybe as a whole, are pushing a certain narrative that's very devoid of kind of human connection, and an understanding of what it means to be human, like the full spectrum of the human experience. And so hearing you talk through that and reminding me and us of there is more to that. And it's interesting that the two of us coming from the tech industry with some
Yeah.
distance
What
are
better
talking
place to
about that.
understand it? Yeah, I mean, what better place to understand it? I think in a
Yes.
way
Yeah.
that again, I continue sort of a belief in the power of technology, and yeah, and I mean, I use those tools, be it design or music, in a way that helps to enable human creativity versus to to overstep it, which seems to be the current prerogative with
Yeah.
the investor calls of today.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great way probably to rephrase this and also give folks an actionable perspective on to really say these tools used with intention and with a certain ethical underpinning can be very enriching, but it requires a lot of discernment and critical thinking and understanding of the human experience to ensure that actually happens.
Yeah, and I think for that education, a big part of it is just having a discourse like we're having here and having it with our friends and people like that, and then sort of I think people intuitively understand that, and a curious person is going to be gravitating towards that anyways.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to wrap it, Sean. This was an incredible conversation, and we will link to all your work in the show notes. I would highly encourage everyone to listen to the music, but also to look at your design work, which has always been a real inspiration for me. Great reminders for, I think, all of us. So thank you for coming on the show. I hope it won't take us another 10 years to be on a video call, although we've been texting back and forth there. But thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for this week's show. Thank you for listening to Poets and Thinkers. If you like this episode, make sure you hit follow and subscribe to get the latest episodes wherever you listen to your podcast.